Hey guys, this is episode 1 of the podcast with Maxim Jago of Social Synchronicity. Um, Maxim Jago is a Adobe master trainer in Adobe Premiere Pro. And what I really love about Maxim is that we were able to speak on a deep level when we first met. And he was willing to share his insights, and a lot of his insights have a very healing impact in the way that he approaches it, and also the way that he articulates his ideas. There's a simplicity to it, but also there's an eloquence to it that allows it allows people to understand it, and it feels very. I love how the way that he speaks. It almost feels like he's speaking. It has that futuristic quality, and also it has that Adobe quality to it. You know, that kind of professionality to it. So I really appreciate that, but I also appreciate his ability to relate with others on a human level and speak about different philosophies, and develop ourselves. So Maxim Jago.
Goodness, thank you. I think with an introduction like that, I need a special voice. I need to say hello, welcome, welcome to the magical show.
Yeah.
But thank you. Yeah, it's I ever since I was very little, I have been a fan of the universe. You know, David Attenborough said that he he wasn't that he loved animals especially. He just was a fan. He just was impressed by them and found them fascinating and beautiful. He respected their existence. And I remember from a very young age, uh, there was this. I was telling the story a while ago. When I was maybe 3 years old, we had a spinning top, and I remember working out how the spinning top worked. You push the thing down, and it spins around, makes a woo sound. And I remember thinking, that's what that does. You push the thing, and it spins, and it makes the woo sound. That's what it's for. And then I had that moment of realization that the world was full of things that you pressed a button and they did a thing, or you turned a thing or you said some words, or there's a way that you interact and it does a thing. And it turns out that people are very similar. But we live lives in ways where we have triggers and we respond to those triggers. And the universe itself, a black hole is at the center of a thing and all this stuff spins around it, and this causality, consequence, outcomes. And I've just, from that moment, I thought, well, I want to find out about all of the things. I want to know how all of it works, what the whole universe is. And I've kind of been on that track for about 40 years now, I suppose. And what I've found is that there is a universality to the human condition. There's a universality to consciousness. There's a universality to that blending, that merging of subjective experience and what we perceive as objective reality, objective truth. And when you recognize the things that we share in our experience with one another, it becomes abundantly clear that the separation that we imagine between ourselves and others, it's imaginary. We're so intertwined with one another. We're so intertwined we can't even see it. So we're kind of like conjoined, 7.5 billion conjoined twins, not realizing that we're fundamentally one.
How are you able to dissolve the illusion of separation, or maybe have glimpses of letting go of the illusion of separation?
That's a great question, but I actually am not sure that that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I've always phrased it is that I do not believe that we are individual consciousnesses. I believe that we are individuated consciousness. But those individuated parts are living out their own existence, just as the cells in your body are. Each cell is getting on with doing its own thing. And who knows if the cells in your body are conscious of the role that they play in the greater whole. And I believe that there has to be some interconnected form of consciousness. And the way I would illustrate that is if you imagine with the fingertips of one hand gently scratching the arm of your other arm. So your right hand, for example, scratches your forearm. The cells in your left forearm will feel the sensation of being scratched. And the cells in your fingertips in your right hand will feel the sensation of scratching. But you experience both. And so, in some meaningful sense, those separate experiences are part of a collective whole. But
Yes.
it may not necessarily be the case that we are supposed to be aware of the whole. Maybe that's not the point. I suspect that it is our limitations that inform us, not our strengths and capabilities. Because I suppose in an infinite universe, it should be possible for beings to exist that can just blink anything into existence, that can change instantly, that can run at the speed of light, that, you know, can know everything, and yet we don't.
Right, yeah.
And you either believe that there's no purpose to our being here, in which case it doesn't matter anyway, or you believe that there is. And if there is, then the design becomes meaningful. It becomes meaningful to review the design and to think about the ways in which the limitations we have provide for a certain type of existence, a certain type of experience. And so, for example, I suspect that a lot of people have at least a rudimentary type of telepathic communication. There's a sense of knowing, but it's usually easier to use words. And in using words, we're forced to think in particular ways. It corrals our thinking into quite linear, structured shapes. And presumably that's valuable because here we are doing it. Presumably that enables us in some way. In, you know, the Darwinian theory of evolution, this argument about the survival of the fittest, it's not the fittest in the sense of the most powerful. It's the fittest in the sense of the most fit for the environment. Whichever species best lives in that environment, they can survive well, stay in the gene pool, and over a long period of time, adapt through adaptation, can be well fitted to the environment. So here we are, well fitted to our existence. And so if it takes time for me to recover from an emotionally traumatic experience, the fact that that is necessary, if we're going to argue that there is a design, then the fact that that period of time is necessary must surely be part of that design. So what does that time give me that just instantly thinking it through and understanding and feeling like, oh yeah, that was a bad thing and I feel fine now? What will that not give me? Or if if somebody has an argument with you and they accuse you of something that you know is not true and you feel defensive, well, why do you feel defensive if you know that it's not true? Well, it must be because you care passionately about the connections you have with people and the way that they perceive you. And it's a threat to your identity if people perceive you in a false light. And then you start to think, well, why is that a threat to my identity? Well, I suppose it's because I define myself on the terms that I perceive others to perceive me as. So if I'm caring more about how other people perceive me, and that's my sense of self, then I have a problem because it's not within my control. And that's interesting. So we go through this learning process that is given to us by the limitations that we have. And I think that's meaningful. I don't believe that's accidental. I just can't accept that it's accidental. The qualities that we have are defined by their limitations. And what is that and why? And I think that the more you research it, the more you become a realist and really look with clarity, really look with lucidity, without judgment, at what is. I think you become an optimist, and I think you just fall in love with the universe. It's like seeing a field of flowers that you thought was beautiful, and then you realized you were seeing it only in black and white. And when you really accept the myriad beauty and diversity, variation of that field of flowers, suddenly it's in color. And a perfect illustrative example of that is perceiving yourself. We tend to view ourselves via the filter of our self-judgments. But unfortunately, if you only see yourself with judgment, you're not seeing yourself, you're seeing the judgment. The only way to begin interior change is by truly knowing yourself, which cannot be with judgment. Non-judgmental self-awareness leads on to non-judgmental awareness of others. It allows you to know where you are on the map, really, and therefore navigate to where you would like to be.
Mm. How would you go about seeing the beauty of our limitations, or is that possible? Or I think you've already described some of it, but there's limitations within ourselves that that we, as you said, that we're very judgmental about, and that we really look within it, like as we get to know ourselves, with that judgment starts to come up, or we become self-critical or something like that. How do we see the beauty of that, and how do we go about loving those aspects? Or or do those aspects just simply, we just don't look at it, or recognize that those aspects don't even exist in the totality of things? How do we go about that?
I think that when we have a line of inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
there's a similar challenge to using phrases like "I must" or "I have to"
Mm-hmm.
or "I should" or "I could."
Yeah.
It's important to finish the sentence, and you finish the sentence by adding the words "in order to." So, how do I see the beauty in me? In order to what? I would argue that the desire to see beauty in yourself is rooted in the fear that you're not beautiful.
I
And
see.
I would argue that actually that type of assessment is not actually meaningful. There's a beautiful description. I can't take any credit for it, I don't think. There's a beautiful description somebody wrote years ago that, there is only one ocean. And therefore, by definition, it is perfect. It is the perfect ocean. There's only one. The only ocean that exists is the ocean, and therefore it's perfect. So anytime you have a thing that is unique, it must be perfect. And since each being is unique, therefore each being is necessarily, logically, perfect. So the question of beauty, there is such a thing as physical beauty. There are some rules. There's a sort of harmony in the facial features, eyes wide apart, almost perfect symmetry, but not quite. Otherwise, it's spooky. There's a certain look that is beautiful to our eyes, but not necessarily beautiful to the eyes of a horse. We have specific species identifiers that we find attractive. Most of them are rooted in our suitability for mating. If you look at, particularly in heterosexual relationships, if you look at what people find attractive in one another, and often even in homosexual relationships, it's the same rules. People are looking for someone to be a parent for children. And so, what heterosexual men look for in in women visually is, curvy hips is high estrogen, good skin means health, full lips also indicates high estrogen levels. There's specific indicators that show that a woman is likely to be able to survive childbirth, which until very recently in our history as a species was life-threatening for women. There's a
Really?
very high chance that a woman wouldn't survive, and the baby, if anything, was more likely to live. And so you want a partner that's going to live. And as a woman, what you're looking for is a partner that is strong. But that doesn't mean physical strength. It means socially dominant, because as social primates, any male that is socially dominant is more likely to have access to food and to keep the female safe. And that makes it much more likely that your offspring will live. And we've taken these very fundamental biological needs and dressed them up into this incredibly complex, and now Lady Gaga is setting a new fashion. And if you look at all of what those trends are rooted in, they're rooted in very fundamental needs. And I would argue that if you look at our emotional needs, and for example, we don't need to accept ourselves. In order to what? Need in order to what? To live? No, you don't need to accept yourself to live. You don't need a healthy diet, fitness, anything, education, not to live. But what if we were to invent a scale? And at one end of the scale, we were to say that there is such a thing as a poor quality life. And at the other end of the scale, there's what we would call a high quality life. If you've ever heard of the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, I think is the author. It's an old book written in the 70s, absolutely phenomenal. And it's a kind of a road movie on motorbikes exploring the question of what the word quality means. And he begins by exploring, how do you know if you buy a wine glass that it's a quality wine glass, or a set of cutlery, or you have a window installed, or an item of clothing? Very difficult to define that word. But you do recognize it when you see it. There's something identifiable about it. There's a sort of fitness for purpose. And there's an elegance of the design where you can say that this was designed in a way that's pleasing for our usually visual apparatus as a species. You know, we tend to see taller things as bigger than wider things. That's to do with the way our vision works. It's not an opinion. So there's a way that we perceive color and light. But there's also a fitness for purpose. You know, if there's a wine glass, is it going to break if it falls on the floor? Does it have a good sheen? Does it allow the color of the wine to show through? Is the lip, you know, well designed for you to drink from? There's a whole bunch of things that you could say that are all rooted in fitness for purpose. And if you were to take that same scale and explore quality in human beings, it becomes a very interesting exploration. And never mind what other people are doing to answer that question. What are you doing to answer that question? What are you? If you want to know if you are a quality human being, never mind, you know, isms, right? Racism, ageism, sexism, homophobia. Just throw those out the window for a moment, right? Just for the purposes of this discussion, let's imagine you live in a universe where none of those things exist. And those things that are temporal, that are not a question of the quality of your character, but a question of how much melanin you have in your skin or some other nonsense, which we all know is because the tribes of our family move to different latitudes and there's different amounts of sun and there's environmental factors. We all know that that's what happens, so it's irrelevant. Throw it away. It's not the same thing as culture. Culture is the thing. But anyway, so if you throw those away for a moment, what you're left with is your own opinion of yourself. Measured against what? Well, let's throw away measurement against other people. There becomes a sort of visible list of characteristics that you recognize as important. And most of them, I think, relate to your fitness for purpose. And all of this, and you mentioned it earlier, boils back down to this question of free will. Because, for example, if you set out to be a runner, running in a race, if that's what you set out to do, then a certain level of physical fitness is going to be a factor. Not so much if you're a violinist, less even if you're a painter. What about if you're an author? Probably the physical fitness isn't that important, apart from dexterity in your fingers typing these days. So there's a fitness for purpose which incorporates our relationships with others and what we do for others. I've always said, I think the fulfillment of human potential is in the service of others. It's in ways that we can be of service to others. But that's not the same thing as being used by others. If you choose to serve somebody, that's you deciding to make a sacrifice of your time and energy and your abilities in the service of somebody else's need, as you understand it, as you identify it. And people enter into all kinds of abusive relationships like that. You know, they enter into, you know, they'll do things for you that you didn't want them to do in order that you owe them a favor. That's not serving them, that's serving you. Or you meet people that give you loads and loads of compliments and say how amazing you are, so that you need them, because it feels good receiving compliments. This is how narcissists run relationships. They give you lots of compliments, and then if you behave in a way that they don't like, they stop the compliments and insult you instead. And now you feel like you're like a 3-year-old being manipulated by your parents through the giving and withholding of love. It's very effective with a 3-year-old. It just doesn't stop. It's always effective. Someone's kind to you, and then you behave in a way that they don't like, and they're unkind to you, righteously, indignantly unkind. Wow, I must have done something wrong. And then you start looking for ways to improve. It's a manipulation technique. But putting aside those distorted versions of service, there is a way for you to seek to ennoble, for you to seek to serve, to help others fulfill their potential, and in doing so, to find ways to fulfill yours. And all of these measurements of your fitness for purpose come back to, I think, identifying a purpose. You can change your mind about it, and being ruthlessly honest with yourself. Absolutely true. I forget the phrase, if only to yourself be true. And that means, you go to an event and you're talking to some people and you make a joke that's not appropriate. And then you feel badly because, it's a fart joke or something. And you feel like, oh, why did I tell that fart joke? Really good company and I was trying to impress them. And now that I'm telling that fart joke that my brother told me, and it is funny, but they didn't laugh because they didn't want to admit that they found it funny. But you've got to admit it's funny. Then you feel badly. And then you digest it after the event and you feel, oh God, social connections for us are so important. And I had this opportunity to present this thing I was doing, and then they didn't think highly of me. So you have to ask yourself, why did I do that thing? Why did I tell that joke? Well, the reason is because it was so crucial for you that you made a good impression. It was so important to you that you were accepted. It mattered to you so much that you helped to ease the mood and the atmosphere and make everyone relax, that you thought that if somebody made a fart joke, it would help you relax. And actually, if you really think it through, if you're honest with yourself without judgment, your intentions were fantastic. What you set out to do by telling that fart joke was great. What you set out to do was help everyone feel more eased, more easement, to feel comfortable. And in doing so, by being the person that helped them to do that, you would show them your value. You'd show them that you're worth knowing. You'd show them that you're someone that they would want to have around. That was a really worthwhile intention. And you came up with a solution to fulfill that intention. And it turns out that, what do you know? That was a miss. And then you think, well, why was that a miss? Well, you know what? It was a miss because of their judgment about what was appropriate in the situation. So you hear about wealthy people wear expensive suits. Billionaires wear jeans and a sweatshirt. They do not care. And I think that you should care, not because you're afraid of being judged, but because you're aware that your actions, your deeds, your words, which are a form of action, the things you choose not to do, the things that you do, the way that you dress, the language that you use, all changes the people that encounter you. It doesn't matter if it's something you wrote down, and you should never be ashamed of anything that you said or did at some point in the past. You're allowed to disagree with yourself now. You don't have to defend what you said previously. You can say, yeah, at the time I thought that, but I realize now I was wrong. Justin Trudeau did that a while back with the blackface thing, which I think is there's a lot to unpack in the concept of whether a Caucasian person darkening their skin to look like they're non-Caucasian, is that in some way an ethical infringement? I'm not a social scientist. I think there's a lot more to unpack in that question than our social media would have us suspect, because I think intention is a key part of whether an injustice is done or not. But again, I'm not a social scientist. But he said publicly, I realize now that was a mistake. At the time, I did not know. At the time, it was an innocent choice. And now looking back, I realize how inappropriate it was. I do not stand by that decision. You don't have to defend it, but it's helpful to understand it. So when you look back at that meeting and you realize, well, I said words that didn't go down well, and it seemed to have a poor impact. Why did it? Why did I decide to? And why did it have that impact? And you may come away thinking, because they were assholes. You might come away thinking, that was an intrinsically funny joke, and there was no reason for them to make me feel bad about it. They made me feel bad about it because they were insecure and they were worried about how that went. Now, years ago, I was on a call with a client, since we're talking about farts. I was on a call with a client years ago, and I shared an office with a friend who never wore underwear, and he had a chair made of gauze. It's just mesh chair. And he was quite an unself-conscious friend sharing this office with me. And the microphone on the phone I was using was quite sensitive. And just exactly in a pause between words as I was speaking, my friend just let out this enormously loud fart. And the client on the other end of the phone call went, And I was so embarrassed and ashamed that I didn't have the presence of mind to say, oh, that wasn't me, by the way. And then spent the rest of the call knowing that the client thought that I had farted and didn't know that the client knew, but they knew. And it was awful. I just got off the call as fast as I can. The best thing about that story is the anecdote. I mean, it's just given me, it's paid off so many times. It's funny. But when you look at your behavior that you regret and you ask yourself, why did I behave in that way? It's part of the beauty. You know, chess is only a game because of the limitations. If all the pieces could move everywhere instantly, there'd be no game.
Mm.
It's the same in life. There's limitations and they allow us to live.
Mm.
And so if you look at what you did and you think, yeah, wow, that sucks. I really acted like an idiot there. Why did I? Oh, that's right. I wanted to impress them. Why didn't it work? Yeah, I suppose if I'd taken another couple of minutes to just acclimatize, I would have realized, oh yeah, actually, that's not the kind of conversation that's going on. In high-level business, one of the things that people look for in somebody that they will do business with is a very acute form of empathy, where you can observe the situation and respond in a way that is apt every time, so that you don't interrupt when it's inappropriate, so that you do interrupt when it's appropriate. So you're generous in the right ways, or you appreciate generosity in the right ways. You respond appropriately. I'm not a psychologist by any stretch. I've read a little bit of Freud's stuff. And if I were to paraphrase awfully some of his lessons learned, it would be that we don't really have a working definition of sanity. There isn't really such a thing objectively. But if you are able to adapt your behavior in response to your environment by choice, if you can elect to apply behavior by choosing to, in response to your environment in a way that is suitable, in a way that is apt, you're probably sane. If you look at cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, at the center of that premise is that actually you don't necessarily have to fix the trauma that happened that was so painful. It would be good if you did, but what you do have to do is probably stop punching random strangers in the street. And you can feel your pain and not punch random strangers in the street. They're two separate things. And I think one of the ways that we judge each other, ourselves, and therefore each other, is that we have feelings and then we judge ourselves for feeling those feelings. It's nonsense. You don't choose your feelings, you experience them. What you choose is what to do about your feelings. And your feelings are there to tell you something. They're one of the magical doorways between the conscious mind and the non-conscious mind. They're a way for your mammalian brain, which is the bit of your brain that makes almost all of your choices, certainly the emotional choices, which is most choices. You know, there's a reptilian brain that does things like blinking and breathing and heartbeats. But if someone says to you, do you want an ice cream? It's totally your mammalian brain that decides, not your cerebral cortex. That part of your brain is telling you why it's choosing things, and it's telling you using emotion. The emotion is the messenger. We confuse it with the origin. If you see your emotions as messengers, you won't judge yourself for receiving those messages. And you're free to choose. You know, if you've read the Nonviolent Communication book, the point is by expressing yourself clearly and defining what it is that you are upset about, what's triggered you, you can express your anger much more effectively. But if you start shouting and smashing up the furniture, you know, communication's about being understood. They're going to know you're angry, but they're not necessarily going to know why. It's like people shouting at the dog saying, you know, how dare you bring that thing into the house? You know you shouldn't do that. And the dog's just hearing, blah, 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 blah. I know you're upset. I haven't the faintest idea why. So, you know, that's what's going on for us. We need to let go of judging our experience, and that includes interior experiences. Really perceive it, really understand it. If you feel pain, emotional or physical, look at the source of the pain. The pain's not the problem. The pain is a consequence of the problem. And it's there to help you by saying, hey, look at this thing. So if you feel ashamed because you made a bad joke at an event, and you feel like, "Ah, you know, why did I do that?" Well, why did I do? Wait a second. Why did I do that? Really? Why did I do that? Don't just feel ashamed. Don't be ashamed of yourself. I must have had a good reason. Nobody does anything for a bad reason. Everyone has good reasons. What was it that made me feel like that'd be a good idea? Oh, I was trying to make a good impression. I was trying to be helpful, trying to relieve the tension a bit and help everyone relax. And why didn't it work? Thought it would work. Why didn't it work? And why did I misjudge it? Well, it didn't work because they were feeling blah, 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 blah. Why didn't I make that judgment call? Ah, that's true, actually. I kind of rushed in. I was a bit late. I didn't look properly. Huh, that's interesting. Great. Next time, I'll look properly before I make fart jokes. And so you're now much more in control because you're more aware. But if you refuse to see yourself clearly, because you're just seeing the judgment, how much control do you have? And the more you recognize that your intentions were good, but sometimes you screw up, the more you forgive other people for having good intentions but screwing up. It's absolutely revelatory. You realize that, most people just want to get along. They want to love. They want to be loved, and they want their love to be accepted. It's really important. And, if you're having an argument with someone that you're in a close relationship with, it can be really helpful to say to them mid-argument, I am angry with you, if that's the truth. Yeah, I'm angry with you, but I just feel I want to share with you that in no way diminishes how much I love you. This argument we're having right now isn't changing how much I love you one little bit. I'm still pissed off with you, but let's just be clear about that. But some people really struggle to disagree without demonizing the other person. They can't love somebody easily that they disagree with about anything. It's impossible for them to fathom that the other person would disagree. And again, it's to do with their sense of self, I think. Ultimately, the issue is that they believe that everyone around them is an extension of them. And so if everyone around them is not in accordance with them, then there's a problem with them. And that's kind of the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is feeling what you think is the same as another person. Empathy is feeling the same as another person. So if someone says to you, let's see now, my father's been taken into hospital and I'm really worried about if he's going to make it. And the person says, are you okay? Do you want to tell me about that? How can I help? What do you need? That's empathy. What do you need? Do you need a cup of tea? Because I'm right there. Reassure them, I've got this, you're okay. Sympathy is saying, oh, I know how you feel. My father went into hospital last week and I was so worried. And I could see it in your body language, just hearing that. Even though I'm fabricating a story, you immediately shut down. You're like, even in this fabricated story, you're feeling like, oh, you're going to tell me about you. Now I have to feel something for you now because you're going to tell me how much you suffered. That's sympathy. And that's kind of one of the problems we've got with the Black Lives Matter movement right now, is that people are saying, hey, Black Lives Matter, the death of a Black person in the United States is a real problem. And we need to make sure everyone realizes that, if they had just written it as Black Lives Also Matter, they would have had less kickback. But unfortunately, people who don't understand the message keep saying, oh, wait a minute, all lives matter. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement is saying, yes, we know you're sympathizing right now. That's not the point. What we need is empathy, because yes, we know all lives matter, but right now it's the Black lives that are having a problem. So just for now, can we please concentrate on the problem? And you can tell me all about how the other lives matter later. So, empathy is responding to the needs that somebody has directly.
That somebody needs directly.
Yeah. And sharing with them. Sympathy is saying, oh, I know how you're feeling. Let me tell you about my suffering.
Okay, so it's that. So sympathy would be saying it, trying to understand the other person, but it's more just kind of redirecting it back to yourself to see if you can understand it instead of.
Well, the problem is about what you're doing for the other person, right?
Mhm.
So sympathy's fine, but what are you doing for the other person? People confuse the two. So you can say, wow, you could be talking to somebody else and say, oh, I met my friend yesterday and they were really upset because their father's just gone into hospital. And I sympathize with them because my father went into hospital a week ago. And, I really know how that feels. That's fine for information sharing. But is that really helping the person who's told you, like, just right now, my father just went into hospital right now, and I don't know what's wrong with him, and I'm worried about him? Is it really helping that person for you to say, I know how you feel? Is it not more helpful to say, how are you feeling?
Okay, right. Yeah.
So, it's controversial, but this is one of the things, therapists do with abusers in abusive relationships. Is the victim, if the couple are lucky enough to go for therapy and it becomes apparent that there's an abuser and a victim of that abuse, very often the therapist will send the victim out of the room and they'll say to the abuser, are you okay? Are you all right? This must be really difficult for you because whatever's happening in your relationship, you have this powerful feeling that it's important for you to do the things that you're doing. And abusers will often say, I don't want to do it. I don't want to beat my partner. And it's not always men hitting women. There's a lot of cases of women hitting men, but it's more men hitting women in domestic relationship abuse. But male or female, whatever it is, of course, men don't report it because of the whole stigma about women hitting men. But it's a large percentage. But they would say, yeah, it's awful. She makes me do this. I have to do it because if I didn't, who knows what would happen? Or he makes me do it. It's the only way to get my message across. I have to hit him because otherwise he just doesn't hear me at all. And it's so important. And so the therapist would begin with empathy. Wow, that must be really hard for you. Now you feel like you're not under attack. Now you can talk and you can share. You can really get to the heart of the matter. Empathy, judgment is just irrelevant to empathy. Now, what if you were to empathize with yourself? What if you were to choose not sympathy, where you have opinions about your behavior? Because the thing about sympathy is your interpretation might be wrong. You might think that you're feeling what the other person's feeling. I mean, I had a friend years ago who, every time I had some negative feeling, would make it his mission to feel what I was feeling more strongly than I was. And I'd end up having to calm him down. And I'd be thinking, for God's sake, I wanted to talk about my feelings. And now I'm trying to reassure you that everything's going to be okay. Bloody hell. So if you sympathize with yourself, you're actually kind of judging. If you think, oh, I was trying to do the right thing logically, intellectually, practically. But what if you empathized with yourself? Kindness is doing what's right for the other person, whether or not it's right for you. What about if you were kind to yourself? What about if you accepted that you really are just trying to do the best that you can? And the truth is, you're not that strong, and you're not that fast, and you're not that smart, and you don't speak all those languages, and you can't run that up that hill. You can't carry that weight. You can't, understand every technology instantly. You are limited. And however, whatever star you're aiming towards, however high you're going, there's only so far you can go. And as much progress as you make, wouldn't it be great if you could be kind to yourself and say to yourself, well done. Didn't make it to the star, but we made it up the hill. That's great. I'm really pleased with myself. And I'm feeling a lot of frustration right now because I was aiming for that star and I didn't reach it. And of course I feel that frustration because I have natural human emotional responses. And frustration in a situation like this is the right way to feel. I've had so many conversations with people where they feel upset about something and they say, oh, I know I should be able to get through this? And I say, absolutely not. What you're feeling right now is exactly the way an emotionally healthy person feels. Why would you deny yourself those appropriate feelings? Of course you feel this way. Not forever. You don't want to dwell on it. You don't want to go into a mental spiral where you're just thinking again and again and again about how miserable you are. There should come a point where you've thought about it a lot, you've understood all the facts, you have no new information and no new approaches to think about it. It's time to change the channel. It's time to think about something different than you were thinking about. And you can come back to it. It's not going to go away. But if you find yourself in that loop of thinking again and again and again about something that makes you feel bad, you're just beating yourself. Why would you do that? It's time to move your thoughts on. Come back to it. You have no new information. Move on. Come back to it. And the same thing when you think about how you're feeling, you know, have empathy with yourself. And when you have empathy with yourself, you realize, well, who's the me that's having empathy with the me? In Zen philosophy, they'd say the thinker is the part of you that's doing the analysis, and we identify with it very often. But the true self is the observer observing the thinker, thinking, this is me thinking. And the observer wants very little. Has very few opinions. Has a sense of right and wrong, has a sense of balance, understands physics and the principles of balance and give and take and old magic, and prayer and faith and philosophy and pragmatism, understands principles, but doesn't particularly have an opinion about what you should do. That's the thinker's job. But when the thinker's getting head up about something, as an observer, you can say, using whatever method you like, to the thinker, hey, it's okay. Time to have an ice cream. You know what? This situation sucks. I'm really unhappy. This thing's a problem. And the flip side works too. If you have something amazing happening, sometimes people flip into, instead of the conceit of thinking you're to blame for things going wrong, that's a form of false conceit. People have the conceit that it's because of them that it's going right. The truth is, you don't know why anything happens. You don't know who you are or where you are or what's going on, where you've come from. You hardly remember anything. Most of your memories are constructed. Goodness knows what's happening in the future. You're just bobbing along in the notion of sense data and confusion. And in amongst that, some great stuff happens. Yay. But this belief that in some way you're in control causes a lot of heartache, a lot of false joy, a lot of false pleasure. But if you just appreciate, as the Dalai Lama said a little while ago, happiness actually comes from appreciation. If you appreciate what you are, including your limitations, because they're the rules of the game that make the game possible. The limitations make you you, and it's beautiful because it's unique and because it's intrinsically beautiful. The mechanism of existence and interaction and engagement and perception and sharing and communicating and loving is just amazingly beautiful. Look at the, photosynthesis, amazingly beautiful. Our emotions are like a sort of love photosynthesis. People give us feelings and we grow them into something and we give them back. This is incredibly beautiful existence. That's what being is, at least interacting as a being. But along the way, appreciation of what is allows you to really enjoy being alive. But the delusion that you're in control, sure, you have an influence, but the delusion that you're in control means you take blame for things that have got nothing to do with you. And you also demand praise and celebrate things that you were just there. And so by appreciating instead, ego is irrelevant. Ego is there to protect you. It's got a function. It's got a role. But if you get carried away with it, it just makes you non-functional. But appreciation is powerful.
What do you think about the evolution of human beings or the evolution of consciousness?
I like it.
Reason why I was asking that, because you were speaking about biology earlier and stuff, so I was interested if you had a take on that. But I loved what you were speaking about in the context of being kind to yourself and having a level of compassion for yourself and stuff, because we do have a lot of limitations that we have to go through, and those limitations create all these emotions that, you know, we may find unpleasant, and, you know, all these external problems that that the emotions attach uh, to the external and stuff. It's like, it's that self-love and that compassion is honestly the biggest thing that I learned in my 49 days of meditating. Because in that 49 days of meditation, you start realizing how much you kind of hate yourself. And it's like, it's not that I hated myself a lot, but I recognize, like, because when I was distracted by the world, like, I didn't know, like, almost my emotions, I wasn't very aware of, like, what my emotions were going through, or what my emotions were messaging to me at all. And what I've realized is that it was like, wow, I have so much, like, that hatred. And that was the value of what you just said, in being kind to yourself and having compassion for yourself, or having empathy for yourself. I found to be the most valuable thing to realize. Yet, like, I didn't understand the importance of that until, like, I became very self-aware, or I really got to know myself, as you say.
But what is hatred?
Yeah.
You know, what is hatred but the fear that you or someone is unworthy of love? And not just unworthy of much love, but unworthy of any love. If you are unworthy of being loved at all, then as a social primate many years ago, you'd probably die. You'd be cast out from the group. You wouldn't have access to food. You certainly wouldn't be allowed to mate. Your genes would be out of the gene pool. You'd be picked off by a predator. So believing that you can be loved is critical for our survival. And it's critical for the survival of our psyche. There's all kinds of evidence that if you don't believe that you're worthy of existing, you become more prone to disease. There's all kinds of, you know, your life is shorter, your quality of life, your energy, all kinds of things are damaged by the belief that you are unworthy of any love. It's a big problem for people who are homeless, huge problem. And I think it flips around to the way you feel about other people. If you feel that for some reason, somebody's done, or some quality of their character means that you feel that they're unworthy of any love, that's a kind of damning judgment that I think leads to hatred. That you demonize them. As they say, you cannot do inhuman things to human beings. You must first dehumanize them. And when you see them as inhuman, then you can do inhuman things to them. Dictators have been showing us that for thousands of years. And we do it to each other. Worst of all, we do it to ourselves.
Absolutely.
You are human. You're going to screw up. You're going to misinterpret. You're going to get things wrong. You're going to try and do the right thing. You're going to get it wrong. You're going to be upset about something because you're upset about one thing, and the hormones are still floating around in your brain. Those feelings get applied to another thing that's got nothing to do with it because it's in 27 minutes, and you're angry with somebody, and then you feel angry about a thing that you didn't feel angry about. So you're having an argument with somebody, and then someone says, do you want a cup of tea? And you're like, yes, I want a cup of tea. And you're thinking, why am I angry about tea? And it's because you're upset, you're triggered, you're in a heightened state. You're human. Give yourself a break. Find the person who offered you the tea and say, I'm sorry, I wasn't angry with you. I apologize. I'm going to own that. You know, I don't stand by what I said, but I accept responsibility for what I said. I didn't mean to snap at you. I'm sorry. I was angry about something else. Don't be afraid to face the judgment, especially if it's appropriate. But I think that self-acceptance, it's not like a cure-all, but it's certainly an important stepping stone. Because as you accept yourself, you discover you can also accept others. People who feel at peace with themselves rarely start fights. And I've got a theory about that if you have a negative internal trait, it tends to express itself externally as the opposite of itself. So, for example, if you're insecure about being attacked physically, people who feel that way tend to be more aggressive. They tend to cause more attacks, to attack people more. Or, you know, if you feel like you're not cool, you're not acceptable, you become cynical, and your humor is often dry humor at the expense of others. You become sarcastic, you become cynical. You make other people feel small because you feel small. It's like an inversion as you externalize it. But I think, to go back to your question about evolution, nobody knows what Homo sapiens sapiens will be, but there is a theory that another layer of the brain will appear, expanding outwards, something on top of the cerebral cortex that would be a fourth connected brain. And we don't really know. I mean, it's lazy language to call it that, really. It's not really a fourth brain, but you know what I mean. The fourth stage of the brain, or fourth layer, reptilian, mammalian, cerebral cortex, and something else. We don't know what that would be. We don't know how it would connect. We've no idea. I mean, there is a theory that people that are on the autism spectrum might well be the human brain 2.0, and there might be absolutely nothing wrong with them at all. And, you know, we have this idea that they can't engage socially. It turns out they're actually so hypersensitive socially that they shut down in order to protect themselves because they're so hypersensitive. Well, what if we lived in a world where everything was perfect for that type of brain? Maybe it's an evolutionary stage. They certainly have incredible abilities often. I don't know. But I think spiritually, well, here's a beautiful thought. If it were the case that we were all one, if every particle in the universe were part of some great whole, then every success by every person is shared by all. And that includes whatever we mean by the phrase spiritual growth. If one being achieves enlightenment, all beings achieve enlightenment. It only takes one.
Wow, that's profound. How has your journey been in enlightenment?
How's my journey been?
Yeah, or just your process of enlightenment. How is that, like, experiences or things that deeply moved you, or things that brought you into a higher space of love? Because I'm on that journey as well, and, you know, to be able to relate with, you know.
I think that each individual has a unique journey, and that journey manifests itself in ways that may not be immediately apparent to somebody outside of that person's mind. It may be that a person is exploring shape and pattern in dance, and that somehow, by reflecting upon the movements of the dancers, they come to an understanding of being in existence that transcends regular human consciousness. The problem with using language to describe subjects like transcendence is that all human language is a set of agreed symbols based on shared experience. And so it becomes necessary to use poetic language, to clash ideas together, to invent a meaning that we don't have a word for because we have no shared experience for it. This is what Plato's Cave of Shadows illustrates. The creature in the Cave of Shadows goes up to the surface and sees things in ways that were not possible before, and then comes back into the cave to explain what the creature had seen, and discovers that they have no words to use to describe it. And the only way it's possible for them to convey understanding to the other creatures in the cave is to lead them out of the cave. But unfortunately, as history demonstrates, the creatures in the cave are convinced that the creature that had seen the surface is just crazy.
Wow.
They're talking about something that makes no sense, that there has no frame of reference, that cannot be real, cannot be true, and therefore they must be mad because they cannot empathize with them. And so, you know, they say when the master's ready, the student will come. The student has to be ready and willing and interested and engaged to go beyond their regular perception of being, their regular sense of awareness of being. But they also say that when the master is ready, the student will come. So let me get this the right way around. No, when the student's ready, the master will come. When the master's ready, the student will. It's both ways. It's the gist of the story.
I see the parallel.
Yeah.
So if you, I think that really it ultimately comes down to just one principle, one metric, which is to want to. If you want to grow, you will. That's not the same thing as pretending to want to grow or being told by others that you should want to grow and trying to play along to please them.
Yeah.
But if you truly actually want to grow, it's like relationships, communication is really important, but it's critical that you respect one another. Because if you don't respect one another, you won't go to the trouble of communicating well. You won't go to the trouble of listening and admitting that you might be wrong. Crucial that you respect one another. Communication is the lifeblood, but there's no bones in the relationship if you don't respect one another. The heart is let's say, the mutual identification, the mutuality of the relationship. But, you have to want the relationship, or you're not going to fight for it. You're not going to strive to nurture it and help it grow and become greater than the sum of its parts, as it were. Something beyond your individual contributions to the relationship. It becomes an entity of its own, in a sense, I suppose.
I just want to add it because with two people, when they want to be in a relationship and to really communicate it, it could work even though there are differences. They're just two completely different people. They can't exactly, there's a couple who are more similar, and then there's another one who are a little bit more on the different side of the ends. And so trying to make it work, it's communication. And so it means two people having to want the relationship, to communicate it, to work.
Yes, but actually, I think that it's I think that the differences and the things that you have in common are largely irrelevant.
Okay.
I think that the thing that connects people together is a different type of scale. It's it's part of what makes you human to connect. And it could be that you have different occupations, that you have different hobbies, different types of friendships and experiences. But ultimately, let's say the factors that make people compatible or incompatible are more like your sets of priorities. So is it a high priority for you to get out and run in the hills and all the time? Or is that something that you're happy to do sometimes, allowing you time to have a relationship with someone who wants to do something else? Is there enough crossover? Do your priorities align in a way that allows you to have a relationship?
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen incredibly successful relationships where the people are very different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as you mentioned earlier, I think, personal integrity, dependability, knowing that you can count on the person to be there for you, knowing that it's being dependable. They say in long-term relationship, at the beginning of a relationship, it's often passion, it's physical. Wants to do the sexy time thing. And you get that honeymoon period where it's all about the sexy time. But then what makes long-term relationships work is also the need to know that this person's got your back, that this person is there for you, that you can count on this person. If you say, look, I really need a ride, I need help, I need to be driven to this thing, that person will be there for you and will do it. And they're not going to say, oh, I'm kind of busy, I'm watching TV right now. That you're able to communicate to one another what really counts as a priority and know that you've been able to communicate it, to know that you are able to convey to your partner what matters to you so that they understand. and for it to be important to them that it's important to you.
Mm.
And if what matters to your partner also matters to you, you've got the foundations of a meaningful relationship. And there was a beautiful article about this by a relationship coach who said that most of the people that came to see them would never have a successful relationship, and he could tell within about 3 questions if the relationship was going to last. And so he would say, and the example he gave in this article was, you imagine you have a couple and the husband is really interested in ornithology, loves birds, is always reading about them and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And the wife in this, married couple in the relationship is reading a book. And the husband looks up and looks out of the window and says, "Oh, look, there's a robin on the windowsill. It's a robin redbreast on the windowsill." And there's 3 possible ways that the wife could respond.
Mm.
One way is, "Oh, that's beautiful. That looks a little bit like the one we saw a couple of days ago. Do you think it might be the same one?"
Mm.
So she stops what she's doing, she acknowledges him, and responds by showing that she is interested in what he's interested in, even if she's not really interested in it. She's supporting him. The second option is that she puts the book down and says, "Oh, that's nice, dear," and then picks the book up again. So she's acknowledging him, she's stopping what she's doing for him, but she's not really committing any kind of devotion to his passion.
Mm.
The third option is she looks up from the book and says, "Can't you see I'm reading? You're really distracting me right now. I'm trying to read a book. Can you empathize with my need?" And the guy says that in a relationship, to take that example, when the husband said, "Oh, look, there's a robin redbreast on the windowsill," what he's actually saying in relationship terms is, "I love you. Do you love me?"
Mm.
And if your partner says something like anything, like, "Oh, I saw a new pair of shoes that I like," or "There's a new show on TV I want to watch," or whatever it is,
Yeah.
if you don't reciprocate with "Yes, I love you,"
Mm.
then there's an issue in your relationship.
Mm.
And he was saying that if in your relationship, one partner will look up and say, "Oh, that's nice," and go back to what they're doing, your relationship might survive. But if the partner looks up and says, "You're distracting me, I'm busy right now," you may as well just, you're done. You don't really have a relationship anymore. You're just coexisting.
We're tolerating each other.
Yeah, but it's about respect, right? If you truly respect your partner, you also appreciate their passions, and it's beautiful. And again, in a weird kind of way, it kind of applies to how you see yourself, right? Because if you accept that there's things you really love that bring you a lot of joy and bring you to life, that self-acceptance is really empowering. It also helps you to recognize who you truly are, because there's going to be activities that bring you to life and give you energy that you could just go without sleep easily for. And there's going to be activities that are like life negating for you. Identify the things that give you life energy and look at the grouping, look at what the cluster of things is, the types of experiences that really fill you with love and light and energy and life force. Because that's probably a weather vane. It's probably an arrow pointing to who and what you are.
What I love about me and Kathy is that, like, in regarding to your example, sometimes I'll be like meditating, and then, I'll ask her, like if she'd like to meditate. And I remember one time she would just like meditate with me for like a whole hour and stuff. And I felt like that was like the deepest call of love that she was able to, provide in that moment. And I felt really in sync with her, and I felt like everything was like going, it was the deepest compliment that a woman, is at least somewhat passionate about like what you're extremely passionate about.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that men and women, broadly speaking, being very lazy with language and data and facts, but broadly speaking, Men and women seek slightly different things in relationships. And what women tend to seek in a relationship is strength from their partner. And that's not physical strength, it's strength of character. There's, a man, this is, listen, this is all anecdotal. I'm just telling you what many, many female friends have told me. But as a woman, when a man puts his arms around you so that you're inside his embrace and he's holding you, his arms are wrapped right around you, and he says, it's going to be okay. It triggers this fantastic endorphin rush of calm and peace. And you feel like, oh, yeah, you can calm down. Women have a tendency towards anxiety, partly because women have the larger corpus callosum. So the two hemispheres of the brain are better connected than they are in men. And there's all this extra ideas, and there's just a lot more information to manage. Men are find it much more straightforward to just think of a single thing or literally nothing. It's almost unthinkable for a woman, but men are perfectly capable of literally thinking of nothing. And it's true, right? We really can, but that's very difficult for a woman because you've got all these amazing connections, fantastic bits of information coming up in your mind and connecting. But so to have a partner that can do that, that can put his arms around you and say, right around you and say, it's going to be okay, is just magical for a woman whose genes are saying, make sure you have a strong partner. So, a lot of women who are abusive in relationships continually test their partner, continually behave in ways that are incredibly challenging. And the reason is often because they're thinking, well, if you can't handle me, how are you going to protect me? How are you going to keep me safe if you can't even handle me? So I need to keep digging and keep pushing and pushing and pushing and challenging you, because otherwise I can't feel safe. And this is epigenetic memory. This is not, culture. It's absolutely universal. And which is not to say that women are not strong. Women are incredibly strong. Definitely the dominant sex. Higher pain threshold, stronger pound for pound, more stamina, more resistant to disease. In terms of biological strength, men are inferior to women, but we have more muscle mass, which means we tend to be more dominant physically. But that's the only reason. Then you've got what men need in a relationship. And this one's a little bit uncomfortable to describe for women. But what men really need in a relationship is devotion. They need their partner to remind them often that they are devoted to them.
Interesting.
And I tell you now, if you actively demonstrate your devotion to your partner on a regular basis, he will do anything for you. And he'll walk out of the house feeling like, okay, how many dragons shall I slay today? How many mountains shall I move? If you, and only you, demonstrate your devotion, and that devotion, it's not servitude. Remember, choosing to serve somebody is not the same thing as being used by them. But it's little things like, recognizing your partner's needs and responding to them before he asks. Little things like, I keep talking about tea because I'm in Britain, but your partner comes home and you make him a cup of tea without him asking you to. And you just put it in front of him, made just the way he likes it, maybe with a biscuit. So you would say a cookie in America. As a man, when your partner does that for you, you feel 5 inches taller. You just feel like, and it's not about, again, it's not about the service. It's a demonstration of devotion. Men and women go out into the world and deal with things in different ways. And it's quite common for men in the world to feel like they're going out and doing battle. They're fighting. They're going out and they're under attack. And everyone's competing with them and challenging them and threatening them. And it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And for a man to come home and have a partner who begins with, what do you need? Who begins with, how can I salve your wounds? Let me fix your armor. Let me care for you. 30 minutes of that, and you can do whatever you like for the rest of the evening. Like 25 minutes of just nursing your partner.
Mm.
And for a man, it's just like the 25 minutes of that, and then, okay, what do you need? But men are often, because of the way culturally, I think more than, it's not biological, culturally, in many cultures, men come back feeling like they've done battle.
Yeah.
And signs of devotion from their partner, again, it doesn't have to be doing a thing. It could just be saying, tell me about your day. Are you okay? I've missed you. Just that can be transformative for a man, but it's an uncomfortable thing to discuss because it sounds a lot like servitude. It sounds a lot like, being a servant for a man. It's not it at all. Not it. Devotion to a man could be, hey, you've been working all day. I really think you should take a break now. I've been aware of how hard you've been working. I think you should, take 20 minutes. And being the one to remind a man to take care of himself, that's a form of devotion. It's very powerful. But you have to get away from this idea of hierarchies. It's not meaningful. Choosing to be devoted. Nurses is a very powerful archetype. To nurse somebody is incredibly loving. And it's not parental. It's an individual choosing to do what they can for another person. And, most men tend to show their care in a relationship with acts of service. They do things for their partners and demonstrate their commitment by doing things. And that doesn't always land. You've heard the 5 love languages thing, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't always hit. If you're lucky, if you both have that as your love language, it's great. But,
Ours is split.
What's that?
Ours is split. So mine is just going from quality time, but his quality time is more towards the bottom, and his is more of a it's what was your first one?
Acts of service.
So my first one's physical touch.
Right.
Third one was quality time.
Yeah.
Gifts was at the bottom. I don't remember my second and fourth one at this moment.
But it's interesting that if you respect one another, you will seek to serve each other's love language. That's what I mean about devotion.
Yeah.
It's not about being a servant to one another. It's about, and this thing about strength and devotion, it goes both ways. It's just that there's a kind of a tendency for the genders that women tend to care more about their partner being strong than they care about their partner being devotional. Still care, but it's not the number one thing. It's flipped often for men. But if you care about one another and you respect one another, you'll find ways to use each other's primary love languages.
I find that very fascinating, and I'm curious as to where you found this. And to relate with what you were saying is that I think I fell into a trap because I biologically resonate with this idea of devotion and stuff. And the way that I've gone about it is that sometimes in order to get that, I would almost give her devotion instead of being the receiving end of devotion and stuff. Because I almost have this biological yearning, okay, if I want her to, be passionate about what I'm passionate about, I'll be I'll figure out a way to align myself with her or something, to be passionate about what she's passionate about, like music or things like art or maybe things about her business and stuff. So
and she probably doesn't want that.
Yeah.
And she probably wants you to do your own thing.
Yeah.
And share your thing with her.
Yeah.
But to respect her passion.
Yes.
So, if she's particularly, you might not care much for people playing the piano as a form of music. She might love it. You respect it by saying, okay, it's date night. I've got us 2 tickets for a piano recital.
Yeah.
Wear this dress. I love you in this dress. Be ready for 8. Tell me, isn't that an amazing, don't you want to hear that from your partner? I got tickets for a thing that you love. I want you to wear this. I want you to dress this way for me. Because I love it I love the way you look in that dress. That's an opportunity for you to be devotional, but also to be served. And he's taking action and making a decision about it, but what he's taking action and making a decision about is being strong for you and choosing something that he knows you will love. And so he's showing that he knows you, which means that you feel seen, you feel acknowledged, you feel respected. And you know it may not be his first choice, but he's noble about it and says, yeah, it's not my first choice, but I really enjoyed that evening. And I loved having that evening with you. As a woman, you're like,
yeah, really, really flattered about it.
right?
Yeah, like I do recognize there are things he would do that would be outside of what he's interested in, and I feel really appreciated. This one time he brought up when we are apart away from each other, and he was in his 49-day meditation. He would sing to himself, and he like Min doesn't usually sing to himself or listen to music, but I'm more listening to music and singing, and so he would do that because I reminded him of this video that I sent him that I was singing and playing the instrument, and so it made me feel like he was interested in what I was passionate about, and I felt loved because of what he did.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You're finding ways to demonstrate to one another.
Yeah.
And it's one of those old rules that they say it's I've heard it said that it's not enough for you to be a good person. You have a responsibility to demonstrate that you are a good person.
Yeah.
And there's a strong evolutionary background to that we have a tendency to focus our attention on the negatives. And if we don't have an explanation for something, we tend to imagine a negative explanation. It's a defense mechanism. And so in a relationship, it's really important that you share with one another the good things that you're doing for one another. But beyond that you share with one another the ways in which you are good people. You've got to earn respect. And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong, is they feel like that the respect is a given and that there's a problem with you if you don't respect somebody. But actually, respect is a consequence of experience, just like disrespect is, like trust and distrust. Those two things are the product of experience. And if you don't give your partner reasons to respect you because you don't tell them about the things that you've done, and it's not about achievements, it's about integrity, it's about kindness, strength of character. You need to share those stories with them. Share your concern about doing the right thing. And everything I'm saying about relationships relates to how you perceive yourself. You should acknowledge to yourself, yeah, I did do the right thing there. That was important to me. That does matter. That is how I see myself. I do see myself as a good person. We have this, false attribution of negative intent. So you see somebody driving a car and they cut you up, pulling in and endanger your life because they pull in so quickly. They're really in your safe stopping distance. And you feel like, wow, they must have seen me and they just decided to disregard my life by pulling in like that, making me brake suddenly.
Yeah.
And, the truth is they probably didn't see you at all. They're in the middle of some emergency. They're not really very aware. They're freaking out and they're just trying to pull over because they realize they nearly missed their junction in this emergency situation that you don't know about. And they didn't see you. You were in their blind spot. But then you could be driving in an emergency. You pull in and the person you pull in front of starts flashing their lights and sounding their horn at you. And you think, wow, what's your problem? I'm in an emergency here. I'm trying to get off the road in a really urgent situation. Can't you see that I'm panicking? And of course, they can't. They don't know you're just driving badly. But you're not intending to drive badly. And it's very rarely the case, indeed, that people are intending to do something negative. It's incredibly rare. People mess up all the time, but it's incredibly rare for people to intentionally be a baddie. Not really. And that's the thing about negotiation, is that everyone thinks it's Dr. Evil and James Bond, and it's really clear about who the goodie is and who the baddie is. The reality is, in most negotiations, there's two people who believe that they are James Bond and the other person is Dr. Evil. They both think they're James Bond and the other person. That's why it's important to get things in writing when you're negotiating stuff. Because if you don't remember the same way, you can look at what you wrote And you can say, well, that's, you know, it's good to send follow-up emails and confirm things and say, this is what I think we agreed. And then you can refer to that email and say, well, you confirmed that was right some time ago. And if I am wrong, tell me in what way I'm wrong, because I think that the writing's quite clear. And then one of you will realize that you're mistaken. But my point is that one of you realizes not that you're evil, you realize that you are mistaken. Nobody, you know, there's a beautiful, I can never remember the name of the comedians. There's a beautiful pair of British comedians who, they're British comedians, but the sketch that they do is set during the Second World War, and they're wearing Nazi SS uniforms. And the scene begins with one of them saying, it's going to be great tomorrow. We are going to get out there and we're going to take on those Allied forces and we're going to give them a good kicking. And they're going to see who they're reckoning with. It's going to be a great fight. And the other guy says, that's really good, but I just have a quick question. He says, have you noticed that we have skulls on our hats? And the guy says, yeah. And he says, and if you look at our flags, if you notice there's skulls on the flags as well. In fact, there's quite a lot of skulls on stuff around here. And I'm just wondering, do you think there's any possibility that we might be the baddies? And his friend says, oh my God, I think you're right. I think we might be the baddies. Oh no. And they run away from the scene, and they realize that they didn't even realize that they were the baddies, but it's the skulls on everything that tells them, you know, hang on a minute, why would we have skulls on things if we were goodies? People don't realize. And the same is true of you. You know, we're all doing our best. We're all winging it. We're all trying as best as we can. And we're going to mess up sometimes. You need to acknowledge your humanity when you make mistakes and realize that it was only a mistake. It wasn't that you set out to be a terrible person. You don't deserve to be punished. There might be consequences. You might be responsible, but, you know, I think that it's very rare that people are really trying to hurt one another. Most people are just trying to live and stay safe, love and be loved and grow. And going back to your evolution, I think that if we are seeing an evolution as a species, one of the signs that I think I see is that we're deepening our sense of mutual identification, that we're beginning to recognize our connections between one another, not as some kind of abstract idea, but as a lived reality. And I think the sense of connection, and I mean those words, the sense of connection, is a very beautiful, apparently ongoing development for us as a species, as beings. Of course, there is a theory that consciousness might be an emergent property of all matter.
Yes.
In which case, you know, what we perceive as consciousness might be a certain type of alignment, in the same way that magnets have the atoms aligned in a specific way to allow the energy flow of the existing electromagnetism, and maybe, or the magnetic field of the particles. Maybe consciousness itself exists in all things, and if it did, it would be a close match for the ancient idea of animism, the belief that spirit dwells in matter. But of course, we have this idea that, which is part of the Judeo-Christian belief systems, that the body is physical and the spirit is not. And I see very little evidence of that. If there is such a thing as spirit, it's probably one with the physical world and an unbroken connection. But maybe we should save that for another conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. I, found this conversation profoundly synchronizing, because a lot of the things that you just spontaneously brought up, because I gave you very general questions, right? And there's this spontaneity that came out, and a lot of the things that that came out were things that me and Kathy were going through, what I'm going through, and all that stuff. And every time I get those kinds of synchronicities, I question myself, like, is this like a synchronicity, or is this like an apparent idea that we're all one because we're all going through the same thing, and that's why these
It's
ideas.
cause and effect. Maybe you are thinking about these things, and in some way that we don't yet understand, you're projecting them, and I'm receiving them and responding to them. And there's a lot of evidence that this kind of multi-level communications going on constantly. And maybe it's that. Maybe it is the macrocosm and the microcosm. Maybe I'm the universe reflecting you back to yourself. Or maybe it's telepathy, or maybe it's nonverbal signals and inflection. Who knows?
Different possibilities, yeah.
But I don't believe in chance. That much I'm pretty sure of.
Well,
I should call it a night. It's 11:30 here now.
Yeah. Kathy, any last words?
Just be happy and be excellent to each other. What's that Bill and Ted quote? I think it's be excellent to each other.
Oh, Kathy, any last words to Maxim?
It was really nice to meet you, and I was feeling a little bit preparing myself to meet you. I was looking you up online, and then you were a filmmaker, a screen director. So I was very intrigued about your the industry of film. So it was.
Oh yeah, well thank you. Yeah, well it's lovely to meet you too.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, I'm just editing my first directorial feature film that we shot last year. It's a supernatural thriller called It's Haunted. It's a video diary style. We're describing it as a kind of like a better shot Blair Witch project. And Blair Witch was incredible when it came out.
Yeah.
And this is, it's a different film entirely, but it's a video diary with supernatural elements, let's put it that way. And it's fun. And I'm working on that right now. I'm also developing a much bigger project, which is a psychological thriller, a very beautiful psychological thriller set in a secret underground artificial garden.
Oh,
and it's about permission and perception. It's about the ways that your perception change the concept of permission. Can you be said to have permitted a thing if you didn't know that it was happening or you didn't understand it? And so it's beautiful psychological thriller that builds and builds. And what's different about the project is that we're planning a 2D film that will look beautiful for cinemas, and also concurrently a full photographic quality, photorealistic, true 3D VR version, 1-to-1 scale. So you'll be able to physically walk around the virtual capture of the garden, the actual garden that the film was shot in, and stand next to the characters as the story unfolds as a non-interactive true VR experience. And we're looking into different technologies to make that as absolutely realistic as possible, so that you can choose to see the cinema version or to stand in the room and witness the story as it were in person. So that's very exciting. It's called Jolly's Garden. And then the one after that is the bigger project again, which is a love story thriller. And it's an amoral film about purpose and I suppose consequence. And that's a very interesting project. We're trying to get some cast together for that. And then the big project I plan to produce before quitting film is called The Power. It's a sci-fi salute to the old manga film, anime film, Akira, exploring the idea that love is the only true power in the universe, but told as a sci-fi. So that's those are the film projects. But there's another big project I'm working on at the moment, which is much broader, which is I'm working on a practical philosophy book. I'm early stages with that. But I'm also the conference director for the Creativity Conference, which is a conference that we're running next year in Reykjavik in Iceland. And it's a global meeting of minds exploring the quintessential essence of creativity with the intention of inspiring and reinvigorating creativity for people who attend. And we're going to stream and allow people to dial in and witness the presentations and experiences that we have. But we're running an online version of that. We'll be announcing it officially shortly in September. We're going to have 90 sessions from amazing speakers exploring their approach to creating something truly original, something that never existed before. So that's coming up too.
Oh, that's great.
Are you involved in the media as well? Are you a filmmaker?
I know. I just I watch movies, so I'm not too. I don't really know too much about the film industry, but I'm very
appreciate films.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah, and also, to end off, what I love about you, Maxim, is that I remember when I was like younger, like 18 and stuff. Every time like I'd be using Adobe Premiere Pro and stuff, you'd always just like give me a little tip here and give me a little tip here. It was like the sweetest moment of gratitude and stuff. I was like, oh, thank you, and it was always, every time I was editing, I was like thinking to myself, oh, when's Maxim gonna come back? You know what I mean? So. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to say so. Thank you. I just think, what's the point of knowledge if you keep it?
Yeah.
What's it for? And I'm glad it's helpful. And I've been impressed by seeing you conducting these interviews. I feel like there's a kind of overarching through line for you here that's taking you somewhere. And I think it's taking you, let's say, uphill.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoy the review as it gets better and better.
I'm a good person. I'm going uphill to affirm, what you've spoken about. And also, is there, any like, trailers on your hard drive that like we can potentially see of your projects and stuff, or you're going to keep that secret for now?
We haven't. Thank you for asking. I'm looking right now at the system I'm using to edit the feature film, and the edit is still at the rough cut stage. So we don't have enough of the film edited to present a trailer, but there will be one. I'll probably post it on my website, and there'll be. I have another project that relates to that, but I can't really talk about it just yet. But there's the trailer will be out there. It's Haunted. We got it up on IMDb. It's great fun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Max.
It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate your time and. You're the first podcast, man. So gratitude.
I was going to say good luck with this project. I'm honored that you've invited me to be the first speaker, and I hope that if you're at home watching this now, I hope that you had plenty of coffee and cookies to go with it, because it's been a journey. But thank you for inviting me to speak.
All right, bye, Maxim. Have a good night.
Thank you. Take it easy.
Yeah.
See you.
See ya. So what do you think, babe?
Wow, that was interesting.
What was like,
it was so cool.
Yeah, it was.
He was so nice and calm. It made me feel like less nervous, but I was like, wow, he's very good at articulating and like making a point, and so it was just very easy to listen to him. Because you know how like when they don't know how to like lead the conversation, so you have to be more of a host.
Yeah.
And so he just knew how to already like carry the conversation into it. It's interesting. Yeah. So did you kind of like pick up on his personality already, where you just like knew that, oh, this is how he is, and then you just kind of let him talk?
It was honestly, I was thinking about like, do I like have prepared questions, or do I just let it like go with the flow and stuff? And I chose the other option, to go with the flow and like try to go deeper into my space of meditation, so that flow is more capable. And it was phenomenal about like what he was like speaking about, and I felt like a lot of the topics that he was speaking about related to us in a very peculiar way. I was like, ooh, yeah, it's hitting me right now, bro. What's up? You know what I mean? Did you feel that or no?
Yeah, well, you did a pretty good job with it, because then like as he was talking, and then you didn't interrupt him, and then I was like, oh, okay, so this is it. It was a very easy flowing sort of like conversation to just kind of get to know more about what he has to say, and I thought it turned out pretty good. It turned out pretty well so far.
Yeah. So what was like the biggest thing that you got from it?
Let me see. I would say the biggest thing I got from Maxim would be when he talked about sympathy and empathy. Yeah. I would say that's something even I like forget to do, and remind myself the difference between those two. So then it was nice that he brought that to attention, and how he was able to tie in the like relationships and love. And he talked about like how like in relationship, it's matching up the priorities, as opposed to like common interest and like, which are really, those are important too, but he also pointed out that priorities have to match, and respecting each other, which I thought was a really good one that he brought up. Yeah. What about you? What did you think? What did you got out of what
I
happened?
was profoundly shocked when he was speaking about like the idea of like devotion, because I thought like that was just me, right? But the fact that he was speaking about it in a way where it was like almost like universal to male behavior and the ways that males respond to that kind of like devotion and stuff, and not saying that it's a form of like servitude or anything like that, right? Like I was profound, like I've watched so many relationship videos and I've never heard that like phrase in that way. So I found that to be like a profoundly unique idea. And you know, he was speaking about, you know, triggers and, you know, like self-acceptance and just very, you know, universal ideas that I was just like, and I just love his energy is very, it has like a sharp cleanliness to it. It's very sharp, but it's like a clean, it's a smooth sharpness that's super clean, and then just, so I was just so happy, you know, to just listen, and I feel like that's how flow happens, when you just listen. Like a lot of the moments there was no like moment that I found that was, as he says, appropriate to, you know, interrupt and stuff. And you know, he was speaking about like in a high level business, like people are basically gauging if you have like that empathetic skills and all that stuff. And I sense that to some degree, because in a lot of social engagements, I'm always gauging the energy of the interaction. So the way he phrases it is like empathy, and the way I phrase it is like the energy, like where is the energy taking me, and where should I go with that energy and all that stuff. And I, number one, also Kathy, thanks for, you know, listening and like being a part of the first one. So really appreciate the fuck out of that.
Well, thanks for having me.
Got you. All right. Peace out, you guys. Say bye to the audience.
Bye.